Hey, welcome back. I'm Jason, and right now we're not in the shop, but we are gonna be. Currently, we are driving my buddy's 1964 Ford Fairlane 500, and he has asked that I install a few upgrades on it. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna break this up into a 4-part series. In part 1, we're gonna be installing a fuel delivery kit from ACE's EFI, and if you've already started guessing, that's because we're upgrading from a carburetor to a throttle body with injection and a computer control. And again, that's from ACE's EFI, that's the kill shot system that they have. In part 3, we're going to be upgrading the ignition system by replacing the HEI that's in the car now with ACE's Blackjack Pro billet distributor, locking that out, installing their coil. And then in part 4, what we're going to do is I'm going to go over all of the install and talk about the pros and cons of all of the parts from the installer's perspective, me. And then later on, potentially in a part 5, if I can convince my buddy to do it, and I know he's watching this video, so think about it, we're going to talk about the midterm review, like a 6-month review of how does he like it compared to the carburetor and the way that it was operating before. Is it more efficient? Is it more fun to drive? Is it more powerful? How, right? All of the different information. So stick along with me as we embark on this journey. These are not my cars. I don't know them. The last time I worked on one was a long time ago. So we'll probably do some learning together, and then we'll have a whole different beast on our hands when this is over. Here are all those parts that we were talking about in the car. On my channel, I cover all sorts of stuff, typically with much newer cars. It has been a long time since I've worked on a car of this vintage with carburetor or, I don't know, glass fuses, simple things like that. The last time was when I was at UTI. I had a 68 Nova that I built a 350 small block for. Vortec heads, comp cam, air rise or dual plane manifold. You know, the special words, I don't really remember any of these things. It's been a long time. But my buddy, he's got this 64 Fairlane, and he asked me to put this kit in for him. So what we have is we have the ACE's fuel injection setup. So this is their fuel system, and then this is the actual fuel injection kit. The way that I'm looking at this install is I want to try to cover it in detail. So I'm going to break it up into a couple of parts. We're going to start with the fuel pump, the return line, keep that simple and just to itself. Then we're going to work on the control module, the throttle body TBI system. And then later, next week or so for me, next video for you, he's going to get the ignition system from ACE's with the billet distributor and coil that will all be controlled by the Killshot EFI control module. That way everything is integrated, everything is working together, and hopefully it's way more efficient, better running, and in the Phoenix heat, he's not getting as many problems as he has been having. So let's jump right into what we have here in the fuel box. So as I'm sure you're aware, in order to run EFI, you need a little bit more than the 5 to 10 PSI that a carburetor might be running on. In this case, we need somewhere around, I believe, the 38 to 40 PSI range. I might be wrong on that. We'll double check that as we're putting this all together. So ACE's sells this complete injection fuel side of the thing. So we've got a regulator, pump, pre-filter, after filter, and then we're going to have to run a return line back to the tank. I still don't know what I'm going to do about that. We'll see what comes in the kit. We'll work through our little map here of what they're asking us to do. This comes really nicely packaged. Actually, I'm quite impressed with this. You've got vacuum sealed fuel pump, your regulator, post filter, pre-filter, and they even send you along a little gauge. If I could get that guy out. Looks like it's even an oil-filled gauge. That's super nice. And our regulator here. Looks like we might have even a reference port here. That might be where this guy goes. We have a vacuum reference. Now, if I say anything stupid, I apologize. Again, I haven't dealt with an older system like this in a long time, I'm used to much more modern cars that I've been working on the past 15 plus years. So we'll kind of work through this together, and then at the end, it'll run, because otherwise I won't let it leave the shop in any other condition. Looks like this is going to be our tank line. When we run our return fuel back to the tank, you don't want to just dump it in the top. If you do that, you're going to get a bunch of aeration in the fuel, which is going to cause aeration through the line and the pump, and you're going to have all sorts of issues that are going to really suck to deal with. So I'm pretty sure that's what this guy is for, so that we can try to get the return fuel below the tank fuel line. Got a whole bunch of AN fittings here, 20 or 25 feet of line, more fittings, little rubber caps for our power connection to our pump, lots of hose clamps, fittings, fittings, and more fittings. All right. With all the fittings out and on the workbench, what I decided to do was make sure to familiarize myself with where all of them go. So I followed the schematic that they gave me here. It had the part numbers and everything on it. We showed that previously, and got everything out of the package, lined everything up so that I had the right fitting and the right part. That way, once I start putting the stuff up against the car, I can see where things are gonna fit, why things are gonna fit, and really I'll have a much cleaner install this way versus doing one individual piece at a time and trying to figure out where this fitting goes or that fitting goes. This will make it much easier in the long run. Okay, after a quick break, I've got the car in the shop. I've got everything lubed up that I think I'm gonna need to remove. Here's what I'm thinking here. I'm thinking I'm gonna need to get the fuel pump as close to the tank as possible to prevent cavitation. So I'm gonna wind up mounting it right up here on the back of the trunk lid, and I'll cut this section out so that we can get our filters in line and the pump up there. And I'll double check that we have enough swing on the axle here that it will all fit. Right now what I'm gonna do is use this handy drain plug and drain the tank, because at some point I'm gonna need to either get to the top of the tank to put in a return, or my buddy is thinking we might put the return on the fuel filler neck up there, which would also mean that I need to drop the tank down. So let's get this thing drained out first, and then we'll drop her down on the ground. Got some empty fuel jugs, a big funnel. Do my best not to get anything on any of these cameras. Here we go. That was easier than I thought it was gonna be. Fuel is clear as can be. That's good. Now, the question is, how much fuel is in here? Pop the fuel lid off, that way we don't get any suction and gurgling. Is this thing on? It's so damn bright out here. All right, hopefully we got enough fuel out. Here's a tip for if you're gonna be dropping this type of a project off at your friend's house: drain the gas tank. I think I got 13 gallons out of there, 10 gallons out of there. I'm glad it wasn't all over the floor and I had the fuel tank or the fuel holders ready. Gas cans, those are the words I'm looking for. There's so many fumes out here, I can't even think straight. My wife came out to check on me and immediately went right back in the house. She was like, nope, not going out there. All right, so we're pulling the sending wire off. Then we're gonna get this fuel line popped out of there. I'm fairly certain I'm gonna pull it off and it's gonna squirt fuel on my face. So, putting a rag here instead. Crap, gas cans are down there. Thumb's holding the fuel line closed. Okay, drained into my towel, that's good. All right, and then to get this the rest of the way off, we have to disconnect the filler neck. So what it looks like is inside the filler neck opening, we have a hose clamp right here clamped onto a bracket, and that bracket is what's going to hold the neck. Not get smacked in the face by these guys. All right, well, wish me luck. I don't know if there's anything else holding this thing on. I don't see any other lines. That's the simplest gas tank I've ever dealt with. Feed line, single sensor. I pulled the gas tank out of the BMW over there. That was a nightmare. Oh, shit. Crap. All right, it's coming down. It's coming down. But it's stuck on the neck. Whew, thought it was going to the floor. Yikes. There it is. Ah. There's still fuel in there. Quite a bit of fuel in there. All right, so yesterday we left off with getting the gas tank dropped down to the ground, which was a bunch of fun. However, afterwards I ran into a couple of difficulties, which required my buddy coming over in the afternoon and a bunch of chatting and no work getting done. However, we came up with a plan because originally what I was planning to do was to use the fuel return bulkhead fittings from the ACES fuel injection or fuel pump kit, which, by the way, is very nice. Let me show you what that looks like here. So what you're looking at is you have the line that goes in the tank. This connects to the bottom, nut, washer, bulkhead fitting, and then AN fitting. And when you're looking at the schematic, that's this section here. Now, the reason that you would want this setup is specifically so that you can get the fuel below the fuel line in the tank, and ultimately what that's going to do is that's going to help prevent aeration of the fuel. However, I ran into a small problem. See, the lock nut on the bottom here, this is a 22. Well, everything that I do I always check metric. It might be standard, I don't know, but a 22 fit on there really well. And then you have the actual AN fitting, which is a bit smaller. I would need to tighten those inside the tank. And here is that tank right here. You can see the opening to the tank is pretty small. Let me put my hand up to it for reference. I'm not getting in there to get to the backside in here to tighten those nuts. And you can see this is the pickup and the sensor. The pickup is just a simple tube that sits in a small depression in the bottom of the tank. And let's move this camera around a little bit. I can show you that there are no baffles in that tank at all. It's just a very simple empty hole. It's not going to focus, but the point aside, with no baffles in there, the fuel is going to slosh all over the place. And here's my hope. If I dump fuel in there without this nice little return line dropping below the fuel line, I hope that as the car is moving down the road and the fuel is sloshing all over the place, that some of the aeration would be minimized. As it is, you're only going to be pulling fuel from this tiny little spot, not inside of a sump anyhow, and I have to imagine on an older vehicle like this that the fuel is aerating to some degree. Correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments. Let me remind you, this is not my specialty, but I'm having fun. So here's what we're going to do instead. What we have is we have this unique riv nut connector here. So we're going to drill a hole in the tank, then we're going to install this guy with the washer, and then what we're going to do is run this bolt down and through on the top side of the tank. And what that will do is that will squeeze down this aluminum frame into a riv nut, and it will lock it into the tank. Then on the top, we'll add our AN fitting. And what I'm thinking is I want this to sit somewhere along the top edge of the tank where we have some room and some availability to drop that fuel in, potentially as far away from the pickup as possible, maybe on the front side here pointing back so that the fuel will mix in, and hopefully that will minimize some of the aeration. So I won't really know how well this works until it's all together, but being that this wasn't my car, I wanted my buddy to make that call on what he wanted it to look like. Before we needlessly go cutting holes in the gas tank, I'm gonna mount the fuel pump, then I'll throw the gas tank back up there, make sure that I can get my filters in line. We have the first filter, the pre-filter, that's gonna flow off of the tank and then into the pump. And then after the pump, we're gonna have a post filter going to the rail. What we're thinking for this guy was, as we've already seen, we double checked how much movement we had in the axle. And talking to my buddy, eventually what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna be changing out the suspension, and we're gonna be bringing the car a little bit up off of the ground from where it is now. These springs are old, sagging, and there may be the potential of a 4-link, or who knows in the future of this car. So regardless, what will happen is we'll get more room above the axle at a later date. Right now we have plenty. So I can't be the only one that lays in bed at night thinking, did I do that right? Last night I made the decision to double check the instructions on this injection kit, and I'm glad that I did, because the part about the fuel pump, I may have messed that up. You see, your fuel pump either is gonna push or it's gonna pull. And in this case, it's a pusher, which means it's not gonna do a very good job pulling the fuel up out of the tank, especially if you mount the pump above the tank line, which is exactly what we did here. We've got the pump up there above, back up without tripping here, the line of the tank. Now, it's not very high above the tank. We're talking about 6 to 8 inches at best. However, I would really like to make sure that this pump doesn't fail, and being that this is on my buddy's car, I really want to make sure even more. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull that back off. Even after all that work, sometimes you have to go, well, that was a bad idea. I should have thought through that a little more clearly the first time. And I think what I'll do is I'll mount the pump right in this region where I put the post filter, moving the post filter further down the line. Hopefully that works out okay. There's not a whole lot of space right there. Let's see if we can make this work. Now, if there was a problem with these push lock hoses, it's that they're really difficult to remove after you push them on there. So just take your time, wiggle them off. What it looks like to me would be right here at the top. This is going to be our best bet, our highest point. So we'll find somewhere, or we'll draw right here. We'll take that rivet, flip it over so that we have a nice flat zone to mount it to get a good bite. Drop this back down, and we're going to be using a 1/2 inch bit. I measured this out at 1/2 inch. And we're going to be coating the bit in grease to try and eliminate anything from falling in there the best we can. Whatever we can do to make sure we're not leaving any metal in there. With a step bit, this would be a bit more difficult because the step bit doesn't flute and pull everything out, but certainly not impossible. Just a couple little pieces and we were able to pull them out perfectly. All right, we're gonna roll with that. I'm happy. I can see all the way across into this corner and I could see just a couple of pieces in there and we got them. So there are a bunch of videos for these weldless fuel return kits out there on the internet. So I'm not going to show you the inside because I can't. But really what's important is when you're torquing it down, that this aluminum is going to squeeze tight. You don't want to smash your O-ring out of place. Because if you wind up doing that, you're going to wind up in quite the hurtful situation and it will blow out the side, which does nobody any good because that means you're going to have a leak. So what's important is this little ridge. You need to make sure that the O-ring or the gasket sits on top of that ridge so that it sits flush. If you don't have it flush and it's off to the side like this, it's going to pinch and you're definitely going to have a leak. So do what you can to slow down and make sure that that is flat all the way around. And you'll also be able to see it flat when it's sitting up against the side of the tank as well. With the return line fitting in the tank, we need to decide where we're going to cut our fuel line, our factory fuel line, and put a flare on it so that we can put the rubber hose to the AN fitting on the tank. And here's what I'm thinking up here is if I cut the line right around in here, what I can do is put a little flare on the end, slide the line over, hose clamp it, and then I'll run it down over here to the side of the tank where our fitting is going to be sitting. I've never flared a line before, but I understand the concept, and I have done it with AC components on a mini split, so it'll be similar, except instead of a single flare, what we're going to do is a bubble instead of crimping it over for that double flare. And that way we'll have the little ridge, like I was saying, like this, so that the hose can go over top of it and have something to restrict its ability to just slide off at the end, which is how I imagine most people are going to wind up doing this, but I just don't feel comfortable leaving it smooth like that. All right, there's our little fitting right there. Got a nice little bubble that we can slide our hose over, help keep it from slipping off. We've got our 6AN fitting to go on our return over here. And then we've got some fuel line to run around the corner to our factory hard line. So what we'll do is we'll find a routing here up and away from the exhaust pipe. And then we'll secure it to the tub of the trunk to keep everything in place. So it looks like, there's my stool. You wonder why I keep stepping up on a stool versus just lowering the car. I hit my head a whole lot less if I have the car up and I have to step onto a stool to get up into places, versus if I'm constantly trying to duck. As it is, I've already hit myself on the diff and on the wheel. Yeah, this is just what I do. All right, that'll wrap up like that. And squeeze my big old neck in here. Cut the line right here. Do you hate when you set stuff down and you're like, where did that thing go?
Where is it?
It was on my tool cart. Should have looked there first. All right. This fuel line slides right up on here, no problem. And what we'll do is we'll just look for our little clampy area. There we go. Feel pretty good about that. And then we're going to use some 5/16 insulated clamps to clamp this up and out of the way here, away from the exhaust. Bam! Nice. All right, I don't really like the hose exposed like this, but up against the pinch weld here is gonna at minimum protect it from anything underneath the car that's gonna be flat. Obviously it could get caught by any number of different things, but that's kind of the game that you play with these older cars unless you're bending a hard line to run down here. There is a nice pinch steel right here. I'm going to bend that back, give it a nice protective area for anything coming forward right there. So this one, I'm going to drill through this flap and run a zip tie there, and then it's going to wrap around the factory line here and then down the fuel, or down the frame rail. I've got the line secured from the front all the way up to the engine bay. Here's what it looks like. And then the line is secured a little over every foot so that really nothing's going to be able to hang down at all the way through here, up, following the factory line, around, and here's where the factory line ended, right there at the fuel pump. Then we're going to go up into the bay. This is going to get a block off plate and connect to our new throttle body. With our fuel hose routed all the way up into the engine bay, now we're going to have to start making our connections to our throttle body. So on this throttle body, it has the screw-on AN fittings here on the passenger side from the factory. However, I want to bring mine up on the driver's side. What's great about these throttle bowls is they're ported across, and then they're also ported across front to back so that you have flow through back to your regulator. What that means is I was able to take the AN fitting off of this side, and I'm going to move it to this side and plug this one. If I take a flashlight, you can prove that fact by shining it through here. Let me bring you in here. Let's see. See how that light comes through there? Making this a really nice universal setup. Now, upon removing these plugs, there was a little bit of either Loctite or thread sealant in there. These are an O-ring seal, but I'm going to go ahead and throw some thread sealant back in there to go back together. I'm just going to put a dab right where they had theirs, and then crank it together. I did clean the sealant out of the threads here on the plug, and I'm not using AN wrenches, which would be ideal in this situation because I don't have any. I'm just going to be really careful not to scratch or gouge them. Now, it's probably unlikely that we need the thread sealant in there. This is probably more as a Loctite measure, which is why they were a little difficult to get out, I imagine. But that's okay. Okay, now we've got a really nice run from our fuel line. We're going to come up the side of the engine bay here, past the front of the valve cover, bam, to right there. And then I think we have enough clearance on our throttle linkage currently that we can even bring the return out and into the regulator on this fender well, not firewall, over here in the corner. So if you're looking for a little bit more information on what's inside the throttle body and the inner workings, I found this channel Action Vulture, where he takes the whole throttle body apart and goes over the good, the bad, the everything inside of it. And that was where I found that these ports all interconnect inside, which made me feel real comfortable about swapping these side to side. So I'll drop a link down in the description. Go check out that guy's channel, Action Vulture. It's pretty awesome, the content he goes into on the kill shot and taking this apart. And that was super helpful. Action, if you wind up seeing this, thank you. So our fuel in is going to come into the front of the throttle body here. Then our fuel out is going to come out of our regulator, or out of the back of the throttle body, and over to the regulator. I'm going to get this mounted up somewhere right here, because out of the bottom is the regulated fuel that's going to go down to our fuel line that goes back to the tank here at the bottom. So somewhere in this region, this guy can sit happily and live its life in nice, cool comfort on the corner over here, away from everything. That means that I'll run a line right along there on the strut tower, which will keep it out of the way of the throttle body. That's full throttle right there. That'll work really well. And it'll also help to keep this side where the harness is going to go cleaner. Choppy choppy time. Okay. Something like that. Right there. All right, we got our fitting, our block off, and our gauge. I'm gonna bring this guy right over here by the harness. Space it out evenly here. Drive it home. Okay, we'll get one screw in. Make sure it's level. Nice and solid right there. Now we just got to get the line from the regulator return side down to our return fitting down here. Squeeze it over. And we're going to bring that up like this. Do some choppy choppy. And let's see, I can tighten this guy up right there. And a hose clamp up here. We'll be just about done with the fuel supply side. So you might be tempted when you're installing your system to go ahead and just leave your fuel pump or your manual fuel pump in the car. But ultimately this wouldn't be a very good decision, because now there's not going to be anything lubricating the pump inside fuel-wise to keep this thing from seizing up on you. Second, you might also be tempted to just reuse the old gasket. You can see this one here is covered in RTV. That gasket will never reseal properly again. So get yourself a proper block-off plate, the logo right there, and a new gasket as you're going back together. We'll get this on, and then we're going to move on to our next section. So one of our last steps in this process is we need to get all of our harness and everything tied up underneath. But beforehand, we're going to take our fuel pump wire and we're going to run it back following this harness here that's running for the rear speaker setup to the back, under the back seat, and then through to the fuel pump. So there's these drain plugs where the original body was formed underneath this fat mat here, and our pump is directly underneath this spot here. So we're going to run the power wire across, drop it right in there. So the ACES kit comes with a pair of crimp connectors and rubber boots to go over top, but I prefer the heat shrink connectors over the purely just crimp, so that we can do everything we can to mitigate any water intrusion that might happen on these lines. Don't forget to install your boots. It's a bummer when you crimp your connectors on and you go back to the toolbox and you see your boots sitting there and you have to cut your new crimps off. Especially when you do that after you've already tightened up your line on the other side. Now you have to take everything back apart. A little warmer. Okay, ready? Don't make the mistake of thinking, oh yeah, I should take more insulation off. More is better, right? Nope, nope. More is not always better in this case. You don't have the patience to get your heat gun out, get the torch out. We've got all of our control wires run. We even have our temporary wires under here to get the factory distributor going. I've got our screen handy. Now we need to kick over the ignition and see if this bad boy turns on and if we can hear the fuel pump. That sounds to me like a pump priming. And we have control panel ignition ready to go. So what that means is you should hit that like and subscribe button so that when I finish this install and I actually crank the key, you can see how it runs. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.